Welcome to another episode of Conduct Detrimental, special college sports edition. I am joined by Tarun Sharma. What's up, Tarun?
What's up, Dan? We've got a good group today.
We do. We have two guests. We got Dan Greene from Newman and Lickstein. Then we have Adam Dale from Winston Strawn. They're going to be talking about the NIL era really to date, and then what NIL and college sports looks like moving forward. But before we get into all that, we had kind of like a big sports weekend. We had NBA playoffs. We had NHL playoffs. We had the Kentucky Derby. We had the Miami Grand Prix. Canelo Alvarez got upset. Like a pretty big random sports weekend.
Yeah, massive. I got to do awesome doubleheader on Saturday. Went to the Twins game and then went to the Minnesota United MLS game, both in the same day. So that was really fun. Had a buddy.
It must be nice. It must be nice not to have kids and you just go to sporting events whenever you want.
That's right. I'm enjoying the freedom for both of us, Dan. That's how you got to look at it.
Well, okay. So that's your life, right? You're going to games. Now I'm going to show you something. You see my finger? Can you see this? So Mother's Day is on Sunday. On Saturday, I know my stuff. I know my thing. I got to get the flowers fresh. Wife goes to sleep a little early. And I'm like, okay, time to make my moves, set the ground floor up. Wife can come downstairs. So I bought some really pretty flowers. The stems were a little long. So you know what I do, Taryn? I take a nice kitchen knife and chopping up the stems. And guess what I do? I chop my finger. That was really bad. And the worst part is I couldn't even scream in pain because the kids were sleeping. I would have woken them up with a blood-curdling scream. But it was very rough. It was a rough period of time.
Yeah, literally blood-curdling. That sucks, man. I'm sorry to hear that. Why don't you just use scissors in the future?
I could, but they're not as effective. And also, I had to put on a Sesame Street Band-Aid because I didn't have an adult Band-Aid. So to add insult to injury. Okay, so I don't want to bury the lead. Kentucky Derby, Bob Baffert was not. Well, you and I were joking. You thought I was joking about this. I have news notifications that go off for like anytime conduct detrimental is used, so I can see when we're shouted in newspapers. I kept getting this notification on Baffert, conduct detrimental. I'm like, what the hell's going on? He got charged in New York with conduct detrimental to racing by the New York Racing Association. So he's not going to be in the Derby. He's not going to be, at least as of right now, he's not going to be in the Belmont. I don't know. Did you watch any of the Derby?
I missed it as it was happening, but I've watched the replay probably 10 times. That was amazing. And the call was so great. I know that a lot of people were getting on the announcer because he didn't mention Rich Strike until like the very end. But Rich Strike came out of nowhere. You watch the beginning of that video, which I think it's like 2 minutes long. Everyone's been posting it.
Yeah, it's just 2 minutes in sports, Taryn.
Yeah. At the beginning of that video, Rich Strike is in like 17th place. And then even entering the final furlong, he's like in 8th or something like that. That was so awesome. That extra gear that he hit, 80-1. Unbelievable. That's like if the Seahawks won the Super Bowl this year.
Yeah, it's wild, number one. So I saw that like a couple horses scratched for him to even get a shot at this. They were like, I listened to a bunch of podcasts trying to get some analysis in the race. Obviously, I lost all my bets because all the podcasts I listened to with analysis, Rich Strike wasn't even in the field until like the day of. So like I'm listening to all these like prognosticators like, oh, like Messier. I had a lot of money on Messier, obviously, former Rangers legend. Messier had some other money sprinkled around, but I'm like, this horse Rich Strike wasn't even in the effing race. And there were T-shirts they made up of like, the Kentucky Derby field. Like he's not even on the shirts. It's really bad.
I saw something fun. Bobby Flay, the chef. So he's doing like some red carpet thing at the Derby and they have everyone pick a horse name out of the hat. He picks Rich Strike. He goes, this horse is not going to win. And he puts it back and lo and behold, Rich Strike, 80-1.
I have a horse racing. Not that I raced horses, but I used to go to the track as a degenerate very young because you could be 18 to go to the track. So my dad and I would go to Yonkers Raceway in Westchester County. And I know a thing or two about horses. So my dad and I were together Saturday night and we're watching the horses come out. My dad's usually pretty good at like, this horse looks good, this horse looks bad. And then like, there's like 21 horses, or there was a scratch. It was number 21. So they were all the way at the end of number 21. They get to Rich Strikes. My dad's like, we don't even need to talk about him. Like, I don't know. He's 21. He's all the way out there, never going to win. And then anyway, we'll get into horse racing nerddom later, but I'm sure at a later point in time, we're going to be talking about Bob Baffert on this podcast with his ongoing battle to get back into the racing sphere. That said, enough of the horse talk. We are going to move to college sports talk. Before we do, Taryn, this Friday is our upcoming bar event. Taryn, you're not going to be there to join us. You're not coming from Minnesota?
I'm not, because I'm graduating on Saturday.
Oh, I mean, you could drink on Friday in New York, take your private jet and fly back to Minnesota.
Yeah, if I had a private jet, that would be a perfect plan.
My dad was listening to our last episode together when we were joking that 10 million, that's more than you and I make in a year. My dad's like, that's way more that you and him make in a year, right? And I'm like, yes, we don't actually have private planes yet.
Seeing as how I make negative money right now, that is very accurate.
You'll see. We're creating special shirts, Tarun, Conduct Detrimental shirts. We're going to open up a Conduct Detrimental store if anybody wants to get them, but we're going to send you a special shirt because you're one of my favorite people. So if anybody is listening and they want a shirt, we're going to have a special few of these made up. Okay. A reminder. Oh, actually, this is a good plug here. Themis Bar Review is actually sponsoring the bar event. We talked about it last episode, and our people over at Themis, they go, whoa. You're doing an event in New York City. You didn't tell us about it. And we're like, I don't know. I don't know if you guys are going to watch the Ranger game, game 6, the Celtics game. They're like, not only do we want to be there, we're going to have actually some of the very high level people, COO type people from Themis at the event, but they said first drink is on them. And if the bill is not crazy, they might even hook us up a little bit further. So everybody don't get crazy. Okay. Just like keep it cool. And maybe Themis will help out. But Themis Bar Review, we've said it really almost like the last year, top bar prep company in the galaxy. They make bar prep fun. And guess what they're going to make fun, Tarun, this week? Bar night. They're going to make the bar night fun. So Themis Bar Review, head over to themisbar.com/condetrimental and you can, get our little fun discount code. So they're going to save us money on the bar night because we were going to hook people up, and they can save you money on the bar prep, and we can too. So you tell us you want to sign up with Themis, we'll get you our special discount code.
I'll be using Themis starting next week, preparing for the bar.
Well, then we're going to need you to pass the exam, because if, Tarun, you did not pass and you had Themis, like that would be bad. But if you didn't, Themis would like hook you up with some like special second test time taker thing, which I'm sure they'll tell us about that exists. I'm sure, because there's such good people at Themis.
Absolutely.
Okay. We have Dan Greene on. Dan Greene is an old friend of mine from Union College. He's in the sports law space. We did this panel recently at Temple Law School, and he said to me, you should be doing more college sports content, more NIL content. And I said, good call. Would you be interested in doing it? So he said, yes, this was a couple of months ago. Wallach and I got together. We said we should be doing more NIL. So I put up the bat signal. Greene answered. So he's going to join us. And then Tarun, Adam Dale, who listened to you and I on our last time together on the podcast and said, if you guys ever need someone to talk NIL, I'd like to join. And Adam Dale, for those that don't know, it was on the NCAA versus Alston case. He's an associate at Winston Strawn. Me and him have some weird family networking connections, which we'll talk about me in the back half of the pod. Tarun, anything to add before we kick it over to Dan Greene? It's a conversation I had with Dan, and then obviously you joined us for the conversation with Adam. Anything to add on the first 10 months of the NIL era?
Yeah, anytime you can add more Dans to a podcast hosted by Dan and Dan, I think you can't go wrong. And then having Adam Dale, it's not like having Michael Jordan because he's not retired, but like having like Anthony Edwards or, a young superstar is very exciting for us.
It's a big compliment. That's Anthony Edwards, a rising star, number one pick to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Tarun, I think that'll do it. Let us kick it over to my conversation with Dan Greene. Dan Greene, fellow alum of Union College and a fellow sports lawyer. Dan, what's up, buddy?
Dan, it's always good to see another fellow Dan, especially one that went to Union College. So thanks for having me on the pod.
Of course. I don't know how much I talk about Union College on the show, but we went to a very small school, about 2,200 kids in the entire school, not the great. And of all people, we have yet another Dan in the sports law sphere. So I did allude to at the end of last episode, we're going to try to talk more college sports, more NIL. We're going to try to give people the lay of the land. If people had tuned out to NIL since like July 1st and they want to know what's going on, we're going to try to give them the last 10 months. You and I are going to try to do that. Let's get started. I'm going to give you just the floor, high level stuff. What is going on today? Like, I feel like there's all this smoke and alarm bells and red lights going off. I feel like we're about to see some movement here.
Yeah, as you said, there's a lot to cover these past 10 months. If you have stopped paying attention since July 1st of 2021, there's a lot to catch up on. Probably take a few episodes of the pod to do that, is my guess. But in recent times, the NCAA has started to at least publicly acknowledge that NIL has kind of gotten a little out of control. There's been a fear about like improper recruiting inducements for high schoolers and people in the portal. And there's this big waiting period right now to see when the NCAA is going to drop their new guidelines to fight back on these improper inducements, and seeing what those investigations would be like. So I think everybody is really just waiting to see how that's going to work out, especially those that have formed collectives, which are group of boosters at a specific school that come together, pool their money, and cut deals with their athletes at their school to make their schools better athletically. That's going to be the big focus of the NCAA about whether what these collectives and individual boosters, which some people are calling directives, whether they're going to be punished from what the NCAA is going to enforce here moving forward, perhaps even this week.
I'm seeing the same reports you are. So I guess, I want to set the stage and why we felt important to do this week as our NIL/college episode. Seems like the NCAA, the sleeping giant for the first time in 10 months, is going to wake up. The question, which, you and I can talk about a little bit, I think the sentiment is if the NCAA tries to act in this NIL space all of a sudden, there is a world where they would get hit with a tidal wave of lawsuits, be it from the collectives, be it from potentially the schools, from the athletes, agents, go on. I mean, in the world that we live in, there are antitrust prohibitions. There are, laws in place to allow a version, I'll call it capitalism, but a free market that people can make whatever living they want. And especially if there's a state law in the books that allows them to operate in the NIL space, for example, like, and I want to get into a little bit of legislation with you, but these boosters are very smart. These collectives are very smart. They operate legally, right, under state law. The question is whether the NCAA as a private organization can tell these collectives, right, these fairly new organizations, how to operate if what they're doing is legal under state law. Dan, the reason I tapped you for this, in addition to having a great first name, congrats to your parents, in addition to being a lawyer, you're an alum of Syracuse Law School, you're an associate at Newman and Lickstein. But, the reason I picked you in particular, I watch your feed pretty closely on Twitter, and it seems like you have a pretty good read on the legislative end. So I want to kind of stick at least this portion of the conversation to state legislation. I think you've seen my soapbox. Like, we're competing for a national championship. We're competing for conference championships across state lines. And the fact that there are different laws across states, sometimes there's no laws in a particular state. Like, right, Alabama repealed their law. It just seems very odd. So part of the thing that is not allowed by and large with states with NIL laws is that schools are not supposed to be involved in the process. They're not supposed to be involved in procuring deals for whatever reason. For better or for worse, they're not supposed to be involved. So there was a looming question as to whether schools could be, I want to say, work with or partner with these collectives in these states. There's like 100 plus collectives around the country. So I know I've been seeing it across my timeline. I think you've been tweeting about it. Is there any guidance on a state level about whether schools can work with these collectives? What are we hearing?
Yeah, I mean, just based on the NCAA's regulations and rules, it's kind of a gray area, especially with the coming of collectives, our collectives, boosters, essentially. Boosters, are still impermissible to reach out to prospective student athletes to recruit them to their school. But what we've seen, frankly, a little publicly, is that some of these collectives are what appears to be recruiting student athletes that are in the transfer portal, high school students, and it seems to be kind of a gray area. And I think some of these state laws that are getting revised or repealed, like you mentioned, are trying to address for that fact, like basically saying that schools and boosters can directly or indirectly facilitate deals for their student athletes.
I think I saw news, right? It was Tennessee and Mississippi, those two passed laws that actually allowed the collectives to work with the schools. Am I reading that correctly?
It's hard to basically say that. It doesn't expressly say that it allows them in their law. So they were one of the states that previously passed a law before Alston, essentially. And it was more restricted than the NCAA policy. And in those laws, they actually had restrictions that said schools and boosters and third parties can't directly or indirectly create compensation for NIL purposes. So now some of these states that are trying to, they're especially in the South that are very big into college football are trying to remove those restrictions from their state laws to not have it be there. So it is basically saying schools and boosters and collectives, have a free reign, but just by removing the restriction, not adding that they can, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, Alabama has repealed their law. I don't know what the trend is, right? I mean, I would think if you're not going to repeal the law, you'd leave something in there to protect you from further action on the NIL level. So I don't know what the future holds at the state level. You and I are not going to get into it. Trust me, I see your face. You're getting more. We're not going to talk Roe v. Wade here, but it's a conversation of state control versus federal control. And I don't know what's going to happen with NIL. I put out a poll last week. Do we think a federal law is going to be passed by the end of 2023? And most people do. I think it's I don't know. It was like 60-40 when I did the poll. But I don't know. I think we continue to operate in chaos until a federal law is passed. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of chaos. It's really hard to predict what the federal government can or cannot do here. We saw those commissioners from a few of the conferences go to Congress, I believe it was last week, basically to ask for Congress to step in, maybe even ask for an antitrust exemption. I definitely wouldn't count on any sort of federal legislation this year. Maybe 2023, but I think a lot of it's also going to depend on what the NCAA is going to do, trying to crack down on the out of control nature of NIL at this point, to see how they will react.
So, Dan, you referenced these commissioners now getting involved. That's Kliavkov, the new Pac-12 commissioner. I guess he's been there for a year, so not necessarily so new. And Sankey, who's the commissioner over in the SEC, maybe the most powerful man in all of college sports, are petitioning, at least this past week, politicians to try to get a federal bill passed. So this is about a year ago, back in June, we had Mark Emmert, on his metaphorical hands and knees begging Congress for a version of some congressional help, and it didn't come. And it hadn't come for 10 months. Obviously, the commissioners, those guys, you ask me, I think they hold the real power in the sport. I'm not sure who's going to replace Mark Emmert as the president of the NCAA, but I don't think that person is going to have more power than Greg Sankey over at the SEC. So that's the next step on the federal level. So I guess part of this NCAA news that's coming up in this next week, man, I don't know, maybe we're going to hear news in the next 48, 72 hours, that the NCAA doesn't love that some of these collectives have been working directly with high school athletes. That's kind of the bad odor that's emanating. So there's a guy named John Ruiz, one of these big mega boosters over at Miami, who's causing, a problem. Not to say that he's been involved with high school athletes, but he goes on these very shows and he says the quiet part out loud. He's done it a couple times. So, Dan, I know you've been following this closely, and maybe, I don't think we've talked about it on this show. What's the sentiment with high school NIL? Like, how many states have high school laws that allow their athletes to make it? So half the country, quarter, is the minority? What are we looking at for high school, and any kind of weird nuances in those laws?
The high school NIL has a little bit of a movement here recently. Originally, it was just California and I believe New York were at the forefront of that. But recently, we've seen plenty of other states at least propose the legalization of NIL for high school athletes, which is mainly done through the high school athletic associations in their bylaws and handbooks. I think the only state that I saw that is at least proposing to legalize high school NIL through the law is Arizona. We actually saw Virginia a few months ago try to pass a law actually making high school NIL illegal. And that got all the way to the governor. It was passed by the House and the Senate of the Commonwealth. And the governor vetoed it, which was very interesting. I think it's really important now that we're seeing all these college athletes being able to capitalize on their NIL rights, that high schoolers want to be able to do the same. And I think it's for the same reasons as well, as that you want to keep your talent within the state.
Let me leave you with this. I've been pretty vocal that this is the issues with the transfer portal, the issues with NIL, those are really big issues, but there's more on the horizon. I don't know how to say it, the toothpaste is out of the tube, so to speak, but we're not quite even at the point where the toothpaste is all the way out, right? There's still some more to come out. So I think you know what I'm going to say here. It's this employee conversation. I think that's the next battle. But Dan, I'll give it to you. Where do you think we are? I mean, is it something the next year? I mean, how far away are we on this employer-employee type battle here?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on what's going to go on with the NIL stuff, coming down from the NCAA this week. The employee matters with college athletes has been talked about for a long time, since the whole Northwestern stuff about a decade ago. And I believe there's a federal case going through in Pennsylvania discussing whether student athletes in Pennsylvania are considered employees of their schools. I think I saw a report that as a part of the conversation at Congress with the commissioners of the SEC, that they brought up the employee conversation as well. And even at the state level, it was only a handful of months ago when Maine was introducing their NIL law that they actually had a provision in the original draft saying that the student athletes were not employees of the school. That law ended up getting passed and enacted into law without that provision in there. So it's been a topic of conversation. Who knows, it'll be put towards the back burner with everything else that's going on, but it'll definitely be within the conversation of NIL, transfer portal, boosters. It's all kind of intertwined together.
Well, obviously keep an eye on it. I think at a really high level, right? Like I think this NCAA this transformation committee has a deadline of August 1st to institute some new changes. The other thing that we should probably hit, I don't know if this iteration of the NCAA is going to exist past the next, I'll say 5 years if I'm being conservative, of the Power Five, the Group of Five. And then when you go to college basketball, there's like 30 plus conferences. At a certain point, the Power Five control all the money in the sport, and they're allowing this version of the NCAA to exist because they wanted to. There's no, I don't know, if they wanted to separate, the SEC, the Big Ten, Pac-12, ACC, and Big 12, like they could. Nothing is holding this together. So we have a really loose framework, and if you're one that wants to see some, I don't want to say the NCAA, we can call it whatever, but some alliance of all these different conferences, this is really the last ditch effort to save it, right? They want to kind of fortify and batten down the hatches, whatever, storm analogy you want to use, because this employee-employer conversation is next. That's going to be a really big one when the money of college sports starts to shift. And, maybe one that's not so far away is the definition of NIL. And, the definition of NIL is still changing. So what's not to say that television revenue will be considered NIL in the next couple of years too. Dan, anything to add before we end our chat?
No, this is really everything kind of reaching a crescendo at this point with NIL, with the NCAA finally jumping back into the game here. What appears like the big thing is we're going to see is are they actually going to enforce their new regulations, rules, however they're going to do it, and then how are they going to do it? Are the collectives going to comply with what they want? Are the NCAA going to be interviewing student athletes for what deals they've signed? Are states going to try to enforce their laws as well, like maybe against some of these collectives and boosters? There's a lot of ifs. I know in the lawyer world, it's always it depends what ifs, but I think everybody's kind of waiting to see what the NCAA is going to come out with and what they're going to do. I think it's even possible that two states like Illinois and South Carolina, who are on the cusp of either suspending or revising their NIL laws, those documents are at the governor's desk. I have not seen that they've been signed. Maybe the governors are waiting to see what happens to NCAA. It's just going to be really fun and interesting to see what happens moving forward.
Dan, thank you for joining the show, and I'll speak to you soon, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
So that was Dan Greene. He's associate at Newman and Lickstein in Syracuse, New York, producer of our show, Mike Lawson, also a Syracuse alum. Dan is pretty good on Twitter. He is at Dan Greene 15. Honestly, I get all my NIL legislation from him on the high school and college level. So I kept seeing it, and I'm like, we should probably start using this stuff on the show. So, Dan, the first call up to the show, and I have a feeling we're going to be hearing from Dan again in the future. Okay, so that'll kick us to our second conversation with Adam Dale. And welcome back, Tarun. You're back on the pod.
I am.
We had some scheduling stuff, so I had to speak to Dan, and then I brought you in for Adam. But this works out. Magical production behind the scenes. Dan, I tried to bring him in just for some bullet points for the first 10 months of NIL. What we're looking at the high school level, on the collegiate level, from a legislative standpoint. And Adam's really going to help explain. Right, he's like a seasoned sports law litigator who's been in the trenches on Alston. I thought he'd be a really good person to really explain where the next level is going to go. Tarun, anything to add before we join our conversation with Adam?
No, I thought he was fantastic.
I'll have some thoughts at the end, but let's kick it over to Adam of Winston and Strawn. Adam, welcome to Conduct Detrimental. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you missed the fancy introduction part. We said how great you were. So just take our word for it that we were singing your high praises.
I trust you guys on that for sure.
I was telling Tarun the story offline. You and I did an Alston panel recently for Pace Law School. I was about to tell you my spiel, lawyer, I have this podcast, and you cut me off. You're like, actually, Dan, I'm familiar with Conduct Detrimental. And I'm like, okay. And I put you on the list. I'm like, we got to get Adam on at some point.
So future listeners, you want to get on, just got to tell Dan how great his podcast is.
I'm not upset when people do that. I actually don't hate that. So Adam, just we'll do a little bit of your background here. We had on earlier in the show, Dan Greene, a sports lawyer out of Syracuse, a friend of mine went to Union with. So what we did is we kind of unpacked the last 10 months of this NIL era. I don't know if it's a misconception or it's just the timing kind of worked out. Some people say the NIL era was created from the NCAA versus Alston case. I think it's just kind of convenient timing because there was this whole big firestorm. But Adam, you're in a really unique position. You went to NYU, and as you explained to me, you've been working on this Alston case really in law school up until the present. Now you're, kind of a polished lawyer. You were the main, I'll say this, it seems like you were like the main associate on the case. So this Alston case, I mean, you worked this up from like its infancy, right?
So I did, as I started as a summer associate, and I'll have to give shout outs to Joey Littman and Tim Nevius, who were the associates on the case at the time. I did basically work my way up to being the most senior associate on the case. And it was a great experience. I mean, I held every role that an associate can have on a case from the very beginning when I was a summer all the way to the end as being one of the key people on the team. So it was a great experience. I joke that I've now, participated in a Supreme Court case. I might as well just retire because that's about as high as you can get as a litigator, and 9-0 victory in the Supreme Court. There's not much more you can do after that. So, I might just wrap it up and move on.
Well, there is probably a higher honor. Listen, you're in the rare air, but you could be arguing the case as your boss Jeffrey Kessler did very admirably, as we analyzed on this podcast once upon a time. But there's still an upward trajectory here. Don't put a glass ceiling on yourself, Adam. The sky's the limit over there, buddy.
That's true. And after I argue the Supreme Court case in a couple of years, I'll come back on here and we'll break it down together.
Breaking news: Adam Dale retires after he argues his first case. We'll do it here. So just a brief background. So NCAA versus Alston was a case that was decided about 2 weeks prior to what we call the NIL era. And that's that July 1st, 2021 date when Florida made their effective date. A bunch of states in the South did. But that was really the onset of NIL. And Adam, when we did our talk for Pace Law School, I think there are, it's just convenient timing, right? I think if the Supreme Court had decided a different way, right, if they had, which some pundits like myself might have thought the NCAA was trying to do, is trying to reach for an antitrust exemption, could have been a different world at the NCAA level. I want to start here, and I want to give you the floor. Just at a really high level, can you explain, what the court held in NCAA versus Alston? And then, Tarun and I have some particular questions, but we want to, you were there, right? Like what was the actual holding? What was the case law that's derived from that decision?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, and Dan, you hit on it a little bit, was that the NCAA is subject to the antitrust laws just like any other business or any other trade association in this country. And that may have been sort of what tilted the NCAA to step back a bit when it came to the NIL restrictions, because they recognized that the Supreme Court 9-0 said they're subject to the antitrust laws just like any other business. In terms of the specific holding in the case, it involved the academic related benefits and compensation that athletes can receive. So the lower court distinguished between sort of two areas of benefits. It was academic related, so that would be tutoring, paid for internships, paid for study abroad. There was a whole list of things that the court included. That's academic related. And then there was sort of the separate non-academic athletics related. The court distinguished those two. The Supreme Court was only presented with a question where the lower court said that the NCAA can no longer restrict any academic related compensation. And the Supreme Court 9-0 said the NCAA cannot be in that business anymore. Academic related compensation is up to the schools to make their own choices.
Adam, we saw with the just this last week that Ohio State is going to start making these direct payments. That was something that was stemming from the Alston case for academic achievement to the student athletes. Was that the biggest win that you guys conceived of achieving when you were talking about this on the trial team, or was the goal really to change the paradigm?
The NCAA for too long has been in the business of holding down competition in the labor market for athlete services. So I think that sort of the shiny object that a lot of media likes to report on are these academic payments. They're very easy to grasp, easy for people to understand. But I mean, we really broke open all academic related compensation. So tutoring had been restrained. Anything that you can think of that goes towards making your academics advanced, the NCAA was in the business of restricting. And so I think when we conceived of the case, we wanted to make this a more open market for athletes to really get their value. And I think we made a really big step in that in the Alston decision.
I think one of those misconceptions that we were mentioning is that Alston, it's not directly to do with NIL. It's just how things ended up working out. But do you think that the decision made it clear that they had to abandon any sort of guardrails that they were discussing for the previous couple of years and then just issuing the interim policy?
I mean, I think that the Alston decision made clear to the NCAA that they were subject to the antitrust laws. Whatever they were pulling out of the Board of Regents case in the 1980s that said the NCAA has, a goal of protecting this revered tradition of amateurism. Whatever the NCAA was holding on from that, the Supreme Court basically said, no, you guys are subject to the antitrust law. So any restraints you're going to put on athletes in the market for their labor is going to be subject to antitrust restraints. And I don't know what the NCAA was considering at the time. As a litigator, I'm sort of programmed to not speculate, to object when someone starts to speculate. So, I really don't know what they were doing. But I will say, I'm not surprised that they took a modestly hands-off approach to NIL.
I was going to ask you a version of that. I mean, listen, you're on the hot seat, counselor. Are you surprised that it took, the report and why we wanted to do this kind of special episode on college sports? There are reports, and we'll see when it actually comes down. The NCAA is debating whether they're going to finally put their foot in a really, we'll say, like affirmative matter into the NIL space. I know they've had this interim guidance out for a while. It's been, my words, it's been a little toothless. It seems like they're about to try to make a splash. Now, you and I spoke offline. My gut is that if and when the NCAA decides to put their foot down, and it could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be in the week, but we sense that it's coming. Is that going to be violative of this decision in Alston? Right. I think the courts are pretty clear. I know it's the concurring opinion, but Gorsuch says the NCAA is not above the law. And now all of a sudden the NCAA seems to be wanting to test that hypothesis. Do you sense lawsuits will be coming and citing to this Alston decision if the NCAA, does act in this regard?
Yeah, it's a good question. The NCAA has a habit of, making a big show of the type of rules they're going to put out and then backing down. They talked about this new constitution they were going to come out with, and I just read last week it's actually probably not coming out when they said it was.
Remember when they're like August 1st, the deadline for the transformation committee, and then like last week they're like, it's not really a deadline. We actually don't have our shit together.
So we'll see. I don't know when or if they will come down with any NIL guardrails, as they're calling them. I know they went on a big media blitz last week to say they will, but we'll see. Will there be lawsuits? I think one of the articles I read, I think it was a CBS Sports article quoting Gene Smith at Ohio State, said they expect lawsuits. So, my guess is if they're going to do something, they expect lawsuits to come. Will lawsuits come? I don't know. But anytime the NCAA is going to start dabbling into this labor market for athletes and restricting what athletes can earn, it's a risk for sure.
I think the other part of this we had, and I don't know, these will be your views, but like at a certain point, college sports are, our country is built on capitalism and having a free market, right? And I think that's a lot of your firm's position in the Alston case. But in the other sense, right, we are still trying to balance like the purists of college football with like a free market. And I think college sports should be a free market. But then there's still people saying, well, like we are not at a point yet where state law is consistent enough to really have like a level playing field. So I don't know, we can put your college sports fan hat on for a second. You don't have to worry about the legal questions here, but like, do you think that a federal law is necessary? Do you think we're kind of like, is the state law atmosphere of just like, hey, some state says this, one state says that, is that fine? Or are you kind of angling like, or hoping for a federal law at some point?
Change is never comfortable for anybody, right? No matter what the change is, whether it's small or big, when you're set in your ways, it's uncomfortable. And I think that's what the NCAA is going through. It's certainly not proven to be a problem. March Madness had massive television ratings. The Big Ten, it was just reported last week, is going to have a potentially $1 billion television deal. I don't think people are running away from college sports because athletes are being compensated for the NILs. I think we have a bunch of people who were set in their ways for a really long time, and they don't like this change. And that's what we're dealing with. It doesn't seem to be an actual problem. It just seems to me that the people who are involved day to day perceive some sort of problem. And yet I still don't understand what that problem is. And I mean, I don't mean to put you guys on the spot, but like, what is the problem? Do you see a problem here?
Well, I told you a story offline. I won't get anybody at your firm in trouble, but I have been one that says, like, I think if federal law will be helpful, and I make the example, and I'm sure I've done it on our show before, but like, you know, the fact that the drinking age in our country is 21 is based on a federal law. It's just, I don't know, it's pretty clean. Like, you go into Jersey, you go into New York, you go into Connecticut, it's 21. There was a time when our parents grew up, Adam, and we won't mention on the podcast, but we have some family connections that go back a couple of years, like where our parents would go across state lines to party, right? Like there was drinking age was one law in one place, different law in a different place. So that lent itself, it's not forum shopping. Us law nerds will call it forum shopping, but like, you know, they were picking different states based on favorable laws. So again, it's not something that hasn't happened in our country, but if those decisions are being made based off of where someone picks their collegiate school, right? They go to, you know, an SEC school instead of an ACC school because of like differences across state lines. It's new, right? But I think for purposes of where someone goes to drink, I don't know, there's no national championship being decided about how many people go to X bar or Y bar. But if a certain state law is favorable or unfavorable for whatever reason, that might impact our on-field performance. So I've been on the soapbox, and you can tell me I'm wrong. I'm happy to hear it. Like, you know, I think if federal law is just clean, it's just 21 is maybe not the right drinking age, but if federal law in the same sense, I don't know if they're going to get it right. I've spoke to people on the left, on the right, some of these lawmakers working on the federal bills. Like, it's just a law that's going to be clean. It's going to avoid these awkward conversations. Like, why is Alabama repealing their law, right? Like, why is Mississippi and Tennessee introducing these aspects of their law to allow them to kind of work a little bit closer with the collectives? And then some states aren't saying anything. So I think that's the uncomfortable part, that people like, I don't want my college sports, my, you know, being decided by how crafty and sneaky my politician is. Like, I want it to be clean. And maybe you're out here, Adam, which is fine, saying like, I don't know, like capitalism, like free market, like let's just, you know, play it where it lies, right? Like, I think those are the two different sides of the coin.
Yeah, I think there's so many variables in college sports that a federal law is only going to do so much. I mean, our federal government doesn't move particularly quickly. I think they might have larger fish to fry than this one. It seems to be working just fine. There are a few articles here and there, a few instances here and there where someone says it's not working out. I personally disagree, right? I think it's just fine. This is the capital markets working, you know, the way they should. Right? It's competition. And if a certain state like Alabama feels like they've restrained their schools too much and they need to repeal their law, more power to them. You know, get rid of it. And so definitely not now, right? We're 10 months in. I don't see any reason that the federal government needs to step in. I don't think there's ever going to be a time where the federal government needs to step in. I really think it's going to work itself out. And it doesn't seem like there has been any harm to college sports while we're going. If anything, college sports is continuing on its tremendous upward trajectory.
One more for me, and then I just want to add one thing that we didn't talk about before, or at least on this show. You know, so we have U.S. Senators Marsha Blackburn, she's a Republican from Tennessee, and Cory Booker, a Democrat from New Jersey, who in the last month or so, they introduced legislation to establish due process for NCAA investigation. So a little bit of a parallel lane, but I don't know. There are politicians that want to inject themselves in the sport, for better or for worse. I seem to think that the NCAA, again, my words, not yours, I don't know. They've dropped the ball on so many different levels. Like, I'm ready to, like, as desperate, this is me, a total desperation. Like, I'm ready to have the federal government involved if they can just get stuff done, because I think on a state right now, I think the main issue I have for NIL is you could have state laws, but until someone wants to punish someone under state law, until there's a proper enforcement mechanisms that's written into these state laws, like, they don't really, like, I don't know, they exist kind of, but they don't really do anything. So I think from an enforcement perspective, pulling away the state governments and allowing, I don't know, federal task force, whatever you want to call it, to at least help with punishment or actually be willing to pull the trigger on some type of punishment, I think that would be helpful. I don't trust the NCAA to handle it. I don't. I haven't trusted the NCAA to handle level 1, level 2, level 3 violations ever. So, you know, I'm ready. I don't know why, but I'm actually okay with the federal government being involved in sports. I am, at least for this narrow purpose.
I think we probably disagree on the fundamental premise, which is that there are rules to be enforced here. I mean, I don't think that there are. Right? There is no reason that every single person in college sports, except the athletes, can participate in a free market to earn what the market will allow them to earn. There is zero reason. The NCAA and Alston said, there's some revered tradition of amateurism, and consumers feel that there needs to be this revered tradition of amateurism. Consumers love NIL, apparently, right? Like I said, the numbers are showing that. So I don't see any justifiable reason for there to be rules to begin with. And if there's no rules to begin with, then there's no rules to be enforced. And we may as well put our resources towards, helping these athletes rather than punishing them. I just don't understand the reason that there needs to be these rules, and they don't work.
My main concern with this entire thing is not necessarily any sort of, mirage of amateurism or whatever, if you ever thought that existed to begin with, but more in the sense that there's this negative externality of all these players jumping in the portal because they have the freedom to do that now, which is fine. Coaches can do that. So I don't see why players shouldn't be able to do that. But jumping into the portal with the expectation of these deals coming through. And now there's thousands of players in the portal, and I talked about this on our last episode, who will not have a spot, and they've given up their guaranteed aid. So, yeah, I think that there's multiple ways of going about it, but if you're not going to have rules that will make it clear when an offer like that might come about, like some sort of window, then, yeah, you need to be putting in rules in place that are going to prevent these kids from throwing away all opportunities because they want to see if something better is out there, which I don't see a problem.
I mean, it's an interesting point. It seems to me that the transfer portal has worked pretty well so far. There's never been a prohibition, for example, on an athlete entering the transfer portal and the school saying, hey, look at this great locker room we're going to have for you. Or, hey, look at this great town that we have over here and all these restaurants that when you walk around, people are going to be excited to see you. I don't see how that's quite different than, hey, here are the NIL deals that might be available to you here. It's just another portion of the offering on campus. I promise you, Clemson is recruiting their transfers with the slide in their locker room and their mini golf course. So why is it any different to say we also happen to have a really devoted fan base here that would love for you to promote their car dealership or their restaurant or their nonprofit charity? I fail to see the distinction where that is a problem.
So I don't have an issue with that either. I'm just concerned about the kids that get stuck in the portal and they don't have anywhere to go because they give up the place where they've been and they're giving up that guaranteed aid by entering the portal. And then they think that there's going to be this better offer on the other side and it's not there. So I think that one of the benefits of this entire system was supposed to be that they were getting better information because they were getting people on their side that were knowledgeable about what the market environment was. And I think that they have a lot of people now telling them to enter the portal thinking that they might get that. And there aren't all of these deals out there. When you have a couple of interesting cases like the Pitt wide receiver or whoever, you think that there's all these deals out there as a student athlete, and there just aren't. And so those are the people that I'm concerned about. If administrators or coaches or whoever have to work a little bit harder to keep their kids, that's what you're getting paid high seven figures for. So, yeah.
Sure. I hear you. I think that is more of a law school hypothetical than reality. I mean, let's see, right? We need a few years to let this play out, but I haven't, at least I have not heard of athletes entering the portal and then sort of getting stuck and not having a place to land. I think that the portal is generally intended for athletes to be able to make their own decisions, right? And that seems to be what they're doing. So, I mean, maybe it's something to revisit, but at this point, it sounds to me more of like a hypothetical problem that the NCAA, I'm sure, would tout. But I don't know that it's a real problem.
I think to Tarun's point, we have a really small sample size of the portal because the rules only existed for a year or two. So I think it's hard to draw any conclusions, good or bad. And then to Tarun's point about this Pitt wide receiver, this guy, Jordan Addison, Biletnikoff winner over at Pitt, Kenny Pickett leaves, and then he's like, you know what, I'm going to put my name in the portal. So there's schools like Texas and USC, and there's rumblings that people are throwing money in him left and right. And there's this BC wide receiver that he was allegedly offered, 600 by one school and 300 by another school, but he's remaining loyal. Like, to your point, Adam, like, I don't know, it's not necessarily a bad thing that athletes are, getting fought over and people throwing money at them left and right. It's not a bad thing. I think, maybe, and I don't want to speak for Tarun, but like, I think if there are going to be rules in place that you're not allowed to, and the NCAA does have it, they do have a rule like this on the books. We'll see if it's ever going to hold up, but that you can't offer someone money as an inducement to transfer. Like you're not supposed to be able to do that, but like you're also not supposed to be able to talk to NBA players while they're under contract with one team. And like it happens every year. Like tampering is like the worst kept secret in pro sports. And that element of tampering, that word is being thrown around in college all of a sudden. So it's not to say that that's a bad thing, right? But I don't know. It's one thing to have rules. It's another thing to have rules that aren't being enforced. So I don't know. I hear you that it's not necessarily like, I don't know. Of course, Tarun and I are not on the platform that athletes should not be allowed to transfer, right? Every other athlete's allowed, every other student is allowed to transfer. Every other, kid in the country can make money off of what they're good at, and athletes shouldn't be written alone. But then again, you don't have like an equivalent like NIL law for like, I don't know, the star musician in the college band. Like that type of nuanced law doesn't exist. So I know state governments have jumped in, and I remember watching the hearings last year, and Marsha Blackburn, and from Tennessee, said like the states have had to step in because of what you, as the NCAA, she was talking to Mark Emmert, like what you have proven incapable of doing. Yeah. So I don't know, the fact that state law has now injected itself, like, can we roll this back? So I don't know. I've said a lot, but I wanted to get you to this point.
So speaking on the future of college sports, really, we saw again this week, Gene Smith, the AD at Ohio State, he said that he would like to see all of the conferences go under the umbrella of the college football playoff and be a self-governing body. Do you think that is any different than what the NCAA would be doing? Is that something that you would like better?
I'm gonna jump in for Adam here. I'll be the shield here. And Adam, you can tell me I'm wrong, but like, if the NCAA is doing it, right, and then I don't know, these super mega conferences, they go off and they do the same thing. I don't know. It's still not great. I think the platform of Alston is basically to say that, like, I don't know, these schools and conferences shouldn't be banding together to say what you can and can't do. It should just be kind of an open season. Adam, how did I do playing the role of Adam Dale here?
Yeah, antitrust lawyer Dan lost. I mean, I think it's right. There seems to be no rational reason for these groups to get together and restrain athletes and only athletes earning potential. It just doesn't. There is no basis for it, and the basis seems to be because that's how we've always done it, right? And how old were you when you stopped listening to your parents when they said you can't do this because I said so, and you started questioning that? I mean, that's sort of the NCAA mantra. Is you can't do this because we think it's bad. But every time they think it's bad and they get rid of their rules, things seem fine. In fact, things seem better. So I think the NCAA and any group of conferences would be well served to step back and allow things to sort of just play out naturally.
So I'm half joking, but we saw this unholy alliance between the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 last year. I'm like, we're combining forces. So there was a thought process that they were combining forces to fight against the SEC, but like, I don't know, maybe they're combining forces to like fight against student athlete rights. Like, I have no idea. Why do you guys need to like align? Just like everybody relax here. Not everything is a Marvel movie in real life. Like everyone's got to calm down here. So Adam, I don't know, is there anything else that you want to touch on in the current landscape of college sports?
No, I think that we've seen what can be in college sports and freedom for athletes. And, many of these athletes finally have an opportunity to take advantage of some of their greatest earning potential in their lives. And so I'm really happy that Alston played a small part of that. I look forward to seeing what continues of it, and we'll keep fighting for athletes' rights as long as the NCAA is trying to restrain them.
Adam, thank you for joining us here, and continue to listen to Conduct Detrimental. You might be one of our more notable listeners, and eventually you're going to have your own Wikipedia page, famous lawyer Adam Dale, and once appeared on Conduct Detrimental. How about that?
All right. I'll make sure it's included in there.
We'll take it. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, guys.
So that was Adam Dale of Winston and Strawn. You want to connect with Adam, I think the best spot is to look for him on LinkedIn. So, Adam, I think this is just a kind of like a small world thing. I had mentioned on the show, when we were speaking to him, we had some weird family connections. So like, I don't know, I always tell you guys, like, the sports law universe is really small. And you always want to make a good impression everywhere you go. If you're going to have a contrarian viewpoint to someone, you just want to say it respectfully. As an aside, like, Adam disagreed with some of the stuff you and I said, but he did it in a really respectful way. So Adam he can come back on the show whenever he wants. But Adam and I were going to do a panel for PACE. And I think a federal law should I don't know. I think it should happen. I was on a panel, I think it was for NYU with one of his colleagues at Winston Strawn. And I made the same point that a federal law is necessary to kind of curb this wild, wild west. And similar to Adam, his colleague, and I won't mention him because he yelled at me a little bit. And he's like, we don't need a federal law. Like, it's fine. You know, it's capitalism. And I'm like, okay. So like, we can agree to disagree, which was fine. Like, you know, it was a healthy disagreement. And Adam is much of the same. So as it turns out, I was doing this PACE panel with Adam. I was about to introduce myself and Adam is like, you know, I know conduct detrimental. And you and I, we have one of these mutual friends from Union College. I don't know. This happened to be the Union College episode randomly. But yeah, one of Adam's closest friends was a really close friend of mine at Union. So it's like this world, the sports world we're in is really small. So I don't know. Sometimes like, I don't know, the guy that we know is not in the sports world. He's in the legal world. But let's say you had made an enemy out of one person, like then it kind of comes around. So I guess the moral of the story is be nice to everybody. How about that? Is that a good lesson, Tarun?
That's right. I agree with that. And the only beef that I had, Dan, that with what you said that when Adam gets a Wikipedia page, it's going to say was one time a guest on Conduct Detrimental. And I really don't think that we should limit him to just one visit. I think he'd come back.
I think he would too, but I think I tried to say like he was once a guest on Conduct Detrimental. If he wants to come back, I mean, that'd be great. It was funny to me. He's like, I'm going to retire after I helped on a case that went to the Supreme Court. Like, Adam, dude, you gotta set the bar higher for yourself, buddy. Like you can be arguing these cases someday. Like Jeffrey Kessler started out helping other people on cases. Like Jim Quinn, I'm sure, started out helping people on cases. And then they rose to the top like a phoenix. They rose from the ashes and they made it all the way to the top. I think this episode's gone on long enough. Tarun, we're talking about baseball, talking about football, talking about basketball, talking about all the sports. And that reminds me, Tarun, underdog fantasy. I've been told that your reads are becoming very popular. So go ahead. You have the floor.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to hear that. You know, I love underdog fantasy. It's the easiest place to play fantasy football. Draft your team with no in-season management, get the optimal score each week of the season, and have a shot at over $10 million in prize money in their Best Ball Mania 3 contest. Head to underdogfantasy.com or the App Store now. They have an app. Sign up with the promo code CONDUCT, CONDUCT, and Underdog is going to match your first deposit up to $100. That's very generous. Again, Underdog Fantasy. Sign up with the promo code CONDUCT and draft your Best Ball Mania 3 team today.
Tarun, excellent read. In a previous life, you could be the AOL movie phone guy. Do you know who that is? AOL movie phone guy?
No, I don't.
He was the precursor to like the Fandango ticket, whatever that person was. But listen, the early stages of the internet weren't great, but they had AOL movie phone guy and they had like AOL keyword search. You know, they had some highlights, but nothing like the world we live in now when you can just Google anything. You know, Tarun, are you technically a millennial or are you Gen Z? Where do you fall on this line? I'm
a millennial. Yeah. I think Gen Z starts around like 97. So just made the cut. Okay.
Listen, if you were not, I mean, this is why you and I get along. Obviously, we're of the same generation. What year were you born?
93.
93. Okay.
93. Yeah.
Tarun, you're a rising star too. Adam Dale, off the record, on the record, told me he really likes you. So listen, greatness. And your Professor Sharma over there. So big things. And congrats too on your upcoming graduation. Big deal.
I can't wait. I'm really excited to be done with law school and really grateful for the opportunity and so glad that this path has led to us crossing and to be able to work together. It's been a pleasure and it's just going to keep going up. Sports law to the moon.
3 years ago, as a baby 1L, you reached out to me on Twitter, and I assumed because you had a baby picture of yourself in the picture, I assumed that you were the father of that child in your picture, and it turned out it was you. So listen, your bio looks good. Everything looks good. You're an accomplished professional now, Tarun. So congrats to you. Congrats to everyone graduating this week, taking finals this week, up and up. If you need career advice, you're looking for next steps. Some people are locked up with jobs, which is great. Congrats to everybody. Some people are not. And at this time when I graduated, I did not have a job, however many moons ago. So everyone, there's a path that everyone lays out. Some of them are a little winding. Some of them are straight to the moon. But, everything happens for a reason. So listen, we are here. Tarun's here to help. I'm here to help. So if you listen to this and you're at a crossroads, certainly reach out. We're happy to help. Tarun, I think we can put this in the books. Anything else?
Yeah, put it in the books.
Okay. For Tarun, myself, Dan Wallach, we'll see you all next time on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.